We might as well get started. Obviously, I'm not Brandon Jury. He's tied up in a student conduct hearing this morning. One of the downsides of being both a PhD and a JD is you get conned into doing student conduct hearings quite a bit. So he asked me to run over and talk to you about global marketing. Doesn't that sound like a thrill? You look kind of skeptical. Okay, so I was thinking about this a few minutes ago, and I'm a paragon of globalism, right? Think about this. The pants I have on are Dockers, and they were made in Nicaragua. Okay, this sweatshirt was made in Honduras. All right, my shoes were made in Indonesia. The frames for my glasses were made in China. The car I got into at the crack of dawn this morning to come up here is a Honda that was actually made in Japan. It replaced a Honda that was made in Ohio, but it's a Japanese car company either way. And the flat tire on my car was a Michelin, which is a French company. So I don't know exactly where that tire was manufactured. I know they have plants in the United States, even though it is a French company. And I wasn't going to look because I was too busy trying not to freeze to death. All right, so you probably, don't take off your clothes. That's not called for. But you probably have the same situation, in your life where you get to take advantage of the great increase in global trade that we've seen in the last 50 years. How many people drink coffee? Right? Do you know where your coffee comes from? Have you ever thought about where your coffee comes from? Do you care? There's no telling where it came from. It depends on what kind of coffee you had and what kind of coffee beans and whatever. I didn't realize until I read a book about it, the coffee business a couple of years ago, but Vietnam is the #2 grower of coffee in the world. Who thought? I didn't know they had coffee in Vietnam. I figured they drank it, but I didn't know they grew it. Yeah, big producer of coffee. So, in this year, 2025, it's estimated that there will be $25 trillion, trillion with a T, dollars worth of world trade. Okay? And that figure has increased every year in about the last 50 years. And we'll look at some of the reasons for that. Here in the United States, the United States, China, Japan, Western Europe, and Canada account for about 2/3 of the world trade in manufactured goods and commodities. Right? My Honda is an example of a manufactured good. This shirt is an example of a manufactured good. The coffee you had this morning is an example of a commodity. Right? Coffee's traded on a commodities market, and lots of exports out of the United States are going to be agricultural commodities. We grow a lot of corn, a lot of rice, that kind of thing. All right, so China is the world's largest exporter, followed by Germany, and the United States is in third position. China has really grown. It's an exporter of mainly low value added items, although that's changing too. And Germany and the United States tend to export a little bit more value added item that we'll talk about here in a minute. Anybody have a Hyundai? No Hyundai drivers. Oh, one Hyundai driver. Okay, what kind do you have? I'm sorry? Oh, okay. So you have the little the SUV? Yeah. Did you have a flat tire this morning? You want to trade? Okay. And it was the new tires that got, one of them had a nail right through it, which is always sort of aggravating. All right. Hyundai is an example of how economic strategy can change, because 30 years ago when they first started bringing Hyundais into the United States, they were dirt cheap. Okay? They were some of the cheapest cars on the road. The problem was they weren't any good. Hyundai has the 100,000-mile warranty on it because they had to do that to sort of signal the fact that they had improved their quality. And now, if you go down in 2015, Hyundais are just as high quality as anything you can get. Maybe you can find a Lexus or a Mercedes that's a little bit higher quality, but as far as Toyota or Honda or Nissan, Hyundais are right up there with them. Their sister companies, Kia, they're a pretty high quality car. And that's how they've changed their strategy from really low quality, low cost vehicle to a pretty high quality, a little bit higher price vehicle than where they started out. Okay. Who's the biggest importer? What country is the biggest importer in the world?
The U.S.
Ta-da! You should have got that just from where my shoes are from, right? We're the #1 importer. The second biggest importer is China, and the third biggest importer is Germany. And one of the things that the book talks about is this concept of a complementary economic flow. In a perfect world, if the United States exported $1 trillion worth of goods, we would import $1 trillion worth of goods. Okay? Now, they wouldn't necessarily be the same thing. We might be exporting computers or software or legal services or medical services, and we would be importing raw materials or paper towels, some form of a manufactured good that doesn't have as much value added in the manufacturing process. Okay, well, it's not a perfect world, and one of the results of not being a perfect world is for years, for like 30 years, the United States has run a pretty significant trade deficit, which just means we import more than we export. And one of the results of that, at least in some people's opinions, is we've exported a lot of jobs to other countries, because a lot of the jobs that used to be in the United States are now performed in other countries where you can get at least the labor part of it is a lot cheaper. This sweatshirt 30 years ago, 50 years ago, would have been manufactured by a union worker who was making, 3 times the minimum wage? I don't know, whatever, who knows. My car, 30 years ago, I had a Chevy, and it was manufactured in a union shop where everybody made more money than I did. Well, not so much anymore, because a lot of the manufacturing jobs have been moved into other countries where the wage rates are much less. There's a downside to that also. The person who made this shirt may have earned 10 cents an hour, and if they stitch their hand to the sewing machine, it's just their tough luck. A lot of countries don't have workers' comp laws. They don't have the same protections that workers do in a little bit more economically advanced countries. So there's a downside to everything. The upside was I got this on sale for like $10, so who can complain? Okay. Obviously, one of the reasons that the United States can afford to continue to be such a big importer is, number one, where we started. We started as a very rich economy, so we had a lot of money to spend. Okay, the second thing is we can borrow money from other countries. You know, if you carry a balance on your MasterCard, who owns that balance? Who do you really owe the debt to? You owe it to MasterCard, but MasterCard has sold that debt 365 different ways, and God really knows who owns your credit card debt. Kind of like who owns the mortgage on your house. I don't know. You know, if your mortgage is through a small mortgage company or through a local bank, maybe it's owned locally. Maybe it's owned by an investor from Dubai. Who knows where this stuff ends up? Okay, the book talks about the fact that not all global trade is done in money, because there's countries that don't have money, all right? Obviously, every country has something that they're using for money, but about 70% of the countries in the world do not use currencies that are easily convertible to other currencies. So you can't just go down and convert your local currency into dollars, into US dollars, and wire them to the United States. So what do you do instead of that? You trade a shipload of coffee for US dollars, or you trade a shipload of coffee for whatever goods you want out of the United States, and then you sell them in your country. And that accounts, this sort of barter system, accounts for about 15 to 20% of all global trade, which is no insignificant amount of money. If it's 20%, that's $5 trillion. It's a lot of money, right? A lot of trade that goes on through the barter system. Okay. What country has the largest gross domestic product? We do. Nope. China is getting there. China has been growing by leaps and bounds. It's still significantly smaller than the United States, and the average incomes in China are much, much lower because they have so many more people than the United States. If you have 1 billion people and you divide your gross national product by 1 billion people, you're going to come up with a smaller figure than if you divide it by 300 million or however many people are in the United States. Okay. The United States, we export a lot of goods, manufactured goods in aerospace, planes, satellites, that kind of thing, chemicals, information technology, pharmaceuticals, and also professional services. Lots of engineers from the United States do work all over the world, and those are considered an export of professional services. Okay, balance of trade is the difference in monetary value of the nation's exports and imports. In the past 30 years, the United States imports have outvalued exports, and the thing you got to remember though is that the absolute value amount of imports and exports has skyrocketed. Not only are we importing more, we're exporting more. So you're talking about a much bigger market than was true 50 years ago, or even 30 years ago. We'll talk about some of the reasons for that. Okay, what's our number one trading partner? Canada. Believe it or not. Number 2 is Mexico. Number 3 is China. Number 4 is Japan. Okay, which is one of the reasons that we'll talk about NAFTA in a minute. And that's one of the reasons why back in the 90s, the North American Free Trade Agreement was signed to open up the markets between Canada, the United States, and China, and they have opened up. You ever wonder why there's all the trucks on I-35? Okay. NAFTA turned I-35 into the greatest land trade route in the history of mankind, and they forgot to improve the road. That's why I-35 is such a mess, because the volumes of traffic on I-35 have gone nowhere but up, and most places they haven't done squat to the road. That's a little dig on why government needs to govern and provide services. We need to go fix the roads. That was an editorial comment, by the way. I don't know if anybody in the College of Business other than me wants the government to do much of anything. Well, they really do. They want the government to subsidize their pet investments and not tax them in. But anyway, that hardly ever works out too well. Okay. As far as exports from the United States, number 1 is China, number 2 is Canada, number 3 is Mexico, number 4 is Japan. So obviously those 4 countries are a lot of our trade, both in the country, going in the country, and going out of the country. China, Japan, and South Korea. This can all be blamed on your Hyundai Santa Fe, by the way. That is about 80% of our trade deficit. So if we quit doing business with China, Japan, and South Korea, it would take out 20% of our trade deficit. Unfortunately, it would also take out a ton of our exports, because 2 of those 3 countries are the biggest buyers from the United States. Okay. On page 162 of the book, it talks about this study that a fellow at Harvard named Michael Porter did. He created this little chart on page 162 called the Diamond of National Competitive Advantage. Okay. Has anybody ever read Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations? The whole concept of that book, you ought to read it sometime. Most of the people on television who talk about free enterprise and Adam Smith have never read the book. It's far less conservative than people think it is, because Adam Smith saw a need for government regulation in markets and that kind of thing. Read Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, okay? And he talks about comparative advantages and why free trade is important. For instance, how many oranges, anybody like orange juice? I like orange juice, I like oranges, you know. I like bananas, right? Everybody like bananas? Bananas are good for you. They got a lot of potassium in them, you know, blah, blah, blah. I feel like I'm teaching home ec. You take the banana. All right. How many oranges or bananas do we grow in Oklahoma? Maybe somebody has a greenhouse and they have an orange tree in their greenhouse, but you're not going to find oranges as a row crop in Oklahoma, right? We grow pecans. Lots of pecans are grown in Oklahoma. We grow lots of wheat. There's other fruit crops, you know, peaches. I'm sorry? Soybeans, yeah, we grow lots of soybeans. Until last week, we probably were working on a pretty good peach crop. That all got killed last Monday because peach trees bloom once, and if you have a freeze, we had the warm weather that made them bloom, and then we had the freeze, so they're all dead now. Not the tree, but there won't be any crop this year. But on any given year, we grow a lot of peaches, that kind of tomatoes, that kind of thing. We don't grow a lot of oranges, all right? Where do you go to grow oranges? Florida. or South America, or someplace where it's warm. Or at least Florida's not bad, although they've had their cold weather this year. South America, remember at the equator, the climates kind of flip. So now is summer in South America, so their crops are growing, and bees are buzzing, birds are chirping, and all is wonderful. And they're out there picking whatever they have, bananas, whatever they have to pick. Well, the comparative advantage says there's some countries that are going to be able to produce goods better than other countries. Or in a country as big as China or the United States or Russia, maybe some area of that country is going to be better at something than other areas of the country. And what Professor Porter did was he came up with 4 key elements that give a country its competitive advantage. All right, number 1 is factor considerations. Factor conditions. Factor conditions reflect a nation's ability to turn its natural resources, education, and infrastructure into a competitive advantage. Natural resources. If I was in Florida and I was an orange grower, the natural resource is good weather, nice temperate weather, and soil that will support orange trees. I don't know if you irrigate orange trees. I know out in, has anybody ever been past like out at Palm Springs, California, or I can't think of the other town that has they have these huge date palm trees, and there's no water out there, right? So they have to irrigate all those things. I don't know if they irrigate orange trees in Florida, because I think they get rain, a lot of rain in Florida. But let's say, you had to, well, that's a natural resource, is it rains in a sufficient quantity at the right time for the orange trees to produce a lot of oranges. Education. This is a chicken and the egg thing, right? Can you attract good paying jobs to Oklahoma? Well, no, not without an educated workforce. Can you educate the workforce without people with high paying jobs paying taxes to support the schools? No, not so easy to do that. So it's a chicken and egg thing. Kind of like if you build it, they will come, right? If you have an educated workforce, you might accidentally attract an employer that needs an educated workforce in a certain area. Now, some of that is certainly true in Oklahoma. We need a lot of people. Everybody knows about hydraulic fracking and directional drilling and all of that stuff. Well, you don't learn how to do that overnight. There's a lot of technical skills that go into that kind of oil and gas activity. You need engineers, you need petroleum engineers, completion engineers. You need people on the drilling rigs that are smart enough to figure out what to do and when they need to do it. And that's an example of how we have those people in Oklahoma, because we have a lot of oil and gas activity here. They have more in Texas because they have more oil and gas activity than we do. Okay, infrastructure. I'll just give you an example of infrastructure being a part of competitive advantage. Back in the early 80s, I invested in a company that had a huge tract of mineral rights, drilling rights in New Zealand. And they went out in the middle of nowhere and they drilled this test well, and it was really promising. And then they went over, so many miles over, and they drilled another test well, and it was really promising. So I bought some more of the stock. And then they went over a few miles this way, and they drilled another test well, and it was really promising. And then they went broke because it would cost so much to get that oil back to anywhere that you could do anything with it, that it wasn't worth doing. There wasn't a pipeline, there wasn't a highway, they were at the end of 100 miles of bad dirt road, right? So the mineral concessions were worth a fortune if you could figure out how to get the oil to market or the gas to market. So they went into the mobile home business in Florida, and my investment was worth about 1/10 of a cent on the dollar. So, you know, there went early retirement, what can I say? So anyway, that's an example of your infrastructure. A negative example of infrastructure. A positive example of infrastructure would be good roads, good ports, good airports, that kind of thing. And that doesn't happen for free, right? Somebody's got to invest in those things to get them built. Let's see. Let's talk a little bit about Silicon Valley. Has anybody ever been to California and seen all the different headquarters of different computer companies, software companies, that kind of thing? How did that get there? Well, combination of ways, natural resources. It's a really nice place to live. You know, the Bay Area, pleasant climate year-round. You have that pesky occasional earthquake that knocks everything down, but hey, no place is perfect. Education, you have top-rate colleges and universities in that area. Stanford and Palo Alto, California, it would be hard to find a better university than Stanford, right? Top-rated in everything. You have a lot of really good, you have UC Davis, which is a really good school. Sac State, Sacramento State is no slouch. It's a lot like UCO. It's out a ways from the capital city, and it started off as a little teacher's college years ago, and as Sacramento and the whole Bay Area have grown, it's got more and more students. What does that sound like? Us, the UCO. This used to be a sleepy little teacher's college, and as Oklahoma City grew, people started coming here and wanting to get an education and better themselves. So it went from a normal school to a college to a university, and the offerings, you know, were expanded to take advantage of what people wanted to learn. And maybe some things like this you didn't want to learn, but all the same and nonetheless. Okay, so that's the factor conditions. Demand conditions. That's the number and the sophistication of domestic consumers for an industry's product. Okay, anybody have a Ford F-150? Okay, you have a Ford F-150. Would you agree that perhaps the Ford F-150 is the greatest truck ever built in the history of mankind? And see, this is dangerous. You may have gotten a lemon.
Yeah, it's also the number one seller.
My experience with Ford F-150s is you put the key in them, you start the thing, and 150,000 miles later, you worry about whether you are tired of looking at this one. Okay? They are a superb product. I mean, you can quibble about the gas mileage if you want to a little bit, but they go like the wind and they last forever. All right. 30 years ago, you couldn't have sold one. Although Ford F-150s have been the top selling truck for years and years, but you couldn't have sold the current one. In 1984, I bought a Nissan pickup with no equipment on it that got 25 miles per gallon. Because 30 years ago, people wanted higher mileage and smaller trucks were where it's at, right? You can't even buy a truck in the United States that's as small as the truck I used to drive. They don't want them anymore, all right? So you could have all the educated workforce, you could have the best technology. If you produce a product nobody wants domestically, you'll never hit. You don't have to worry about competitive advantage because you're going to go broke. What's another example of that is BlackBerry. Man, when BlackBerry came out, woohoo, it was the greatest thing since sliced bread. Then they came out with the iPhone, and it's been downhill for BlackBerry ever since, right? So that's one way that you get your competitive advantage for gizmos and gewgaws like iPhones, is we have a domestic market that loves that stuff. And they're willing to buy a new one every 18 months as long as the new one has more bells and whistles on it, okay? And you can't very well get yourself set up to have a competitive advantage in international trade if you can't sell your stuff domestically. All right, so those are demand conditions. Number 3, related and supportive industries. Firms and industries seeking leadership in global markets need world-class suppliers that accelerate innovation. All right. You may have been in junior high when this happened, but the Federales had to bail General Motors out. Why? And whether it was right or wrong, I don't know, maybe you need to debate that in economics class. But for my purposes, let's just assume that it happened, so it's too late to worry about whether it was right or wrong. We'll ask for forgiveness or take credit for it. Okay, but what was the justification for bailing General Motors out? They had 1 million jobs in General Motors suppliers on the line. Because if General Motors went broke and shut down, the people that made the glass for General Motors go broke. The people that make the radios go broke. The people that make the tires go, or at least have to lay people off. So to protect this million person workforce in the suppliers, the feds kept General Motors going, right? Well, you've got some really good suppliers out there in that supply chain, and that enables, like your Ford F-150 has 3,000 parts maybe, right? And each one of those parts has to be really good, or you're not going to have a very good end product, or you're going to have a 1999 Chevrolet Silverado that the water pump goes out every 10,000 miles because they had a weakness in the supply chain. They had a bad supplier that was giving them bad water pumps, right? Or a bad design or something. Okay, so you need suppliers that are high quality and are innovative. You either make it better or you make it cheaper, or maybe both, right? My first computer that I bought for my law office in 1983 was, you got more computing power in your phone than my computer had. It was a dedicated word processor. It worked on those big old floppy disks that were about yay big, and you slid it in the disk drive, and you turned the switch, and locked it in, and then you went over here and turned everything on, and you heard little grunts and groans, and 5 minutes later the monitor starts lighting up. And it all fed into a printer that was a wonderful printer, but it was so loud I had to have a carpenter build a cabinet to put it in because you couldn't hear yourself think when you were printing. Okay, it was $10,000 in 1983. I don't know that you could buy, maybe some kid's toy would have the limited amount of computing power that that product had that you could buy for $10, maybe. I don't know. I don't know why anybody would make anything that antiquated. But go down and get Go down and get a new Microsoft Surface. What are they, a few $100s? Go buy you a couple $100 printer, and you've got a quicker, better, faster, more reliable machine than I bought for $10,000 years ago. Okay, what do you have to do to get that done? You got to have good suppliers. You also have to have people out there who are smart enough to write the software for them. That was my first computer that I purchased for $10,000 was a Xerox. Anybody heard about anybody buying a Xerox computer lately? It doesn't, unless maybe it's an antique on eBay, it doesn't happen because as soon as Microsoft brought out the first PC, everybody started writing software for Microsoft PCs. Okay, you don't want to get into a big Apple versus Microsoft battle, even though Apple is Satan, and we don't need to talk about it. They're probably really good machines. I've never had one. So when everybody starts writing the software, when all these suppliers start writing the software for the PCs, that gives them a competitive advantage, both in this country and globally. So that's your related and supportive industries. Another example of this that the book talks about, why are Swiss watches considered the watch? You know, I don't know if does anybody in here wear a watch? I know a lot of people just tell time on their cell phone. I'm old, I still have a watch. If I forget to wear it every day, I'm kind of shaky all day and, you know, wondering, where's my watch? Even though I have a phone in my pocket, you know, I pull it out and I know exactly what time it is. Swiss watches are considered the best watches in the world because the companies in Switzerland that make the watch movements make the best watch movements in the world. You know, I've had Seiko watches, they're good watches, but I've never had a Seiko watch that was 35 years old, right? Something happens to them. I never had a Seiko watch that cost as much as my car either, so that's a whole nother story. But, so that shows you how other factors out in your domestic economy can affect the global marketplace. Okay, then there's company strategy, structure, and rivalry. One of the ways that you can see that a company is positioned to be a strong global competitor is they have strong rivals in the domestic economy. All right? If you have 5 companies fighting tooth and toenail to produce the best product at, you know, the best product for the money, chances are pretty good that those companies will have a competitive advantage because this domestic competition and this domestic rivalry makes them a stronger company with a better product, and you can sell that anywhere. I guess maybe software would be an example of that. You know, a lot of the hardware manufacturing goes on, God knows where, but the software is still written in the United States because we have people competing to write the best software. Another example of the downside of this is the auto industry. Okay, Ford F-150s are really good trucks, but there's a lot of places that you can't sell them because a lot of countries that should be good markets have fuel economy standards that are higher than in the United States, or they have pollution standards that are higher than the United States, or the trucks are too expensive for a foreign market. The United States car companies traditionally took the approach of we're going to make our money on big cars. You know, car companies make a lot of money on the options. Cadillacs have a lot of options. We'll concentrate on the Cadillacs and we'll build Chevy Cavaliers kind of to get people started buying General Motors cars, and then we'll work them up into a Buick where we can actually make some money, and then we'll work them up into a Cadillac, right? So that's what used to happen. If I had graduated from law school in 1950 instead of 1980, when I graduated from law school, I had a Chevy. Well, I wouldn't have had a Camaro in 1950, but go with me here. I had a Chevy. Okay, then in 10 or 15 years, I would have got a Buick or Oldsmobile, probably a station wagon for the 2.7 children and the dog named Fluffy, because there weren't any SUVs. Then at where I am now, I'd have a Cadillac, okay, because I'm not at the end of my career, but I'm kind of at the beginning of the end of my career. You know, I don't know how many more mountains I'm going to climb or dragons I'm going to be able to slay, but I'm not ready to just sit at home and watch reruns and The Price is Right all day, although a few in the administration building think I should from time to time. But, oh, I won't talk about that. Okay, but I'm 58. I'd have a Cadillac, right? Well, I have a Honda. You know, somewhere, I think probably because of quality issues and probably because of gas mileage and probably because about 20 years ago, I became my father and got cheap. I don't drive, you know, I don't drive a Cadillac or a Lincoln. I don't want a Cadillac or a Lincoln. It's not my ideal. I want a car that is just simple transportation, preferably with 4 tires with air in them. But that's a whole nother story. So anyway, the American car companies concentrated on big cars that didn't get a lot of gas mileage. Okay? Anybody ever been in Europe? Yeah. There's tons of Dodge minivans in Europe floating around. They get good gas mileage, they're not really expensive, and they're convenient. You know, I wouldn't own one on a bet. Yeah, I might buy one and, you know, take all the seats out and use it to haul stuff around or something. Put the dogs in it and take them down to the park. But I wouldn't drive one of the things every day. But if you got 2.7 kids and a dog named Fluffy, they're very convenient. You know, you can just glue the kids to the back seats, off you go. All right. Well, they're popular. You can sell those in Europe, but you couldn't sell American cars in Europe because their gas was $5 a liter. You know, nobody wants to drive a car that gets 10 miles per gallon if you're paying out the nose for the gasoline. So, but we had a domestic market, but we didn't really have a global market. Although there was a little miniature global market in Germany, for some reason, back in the 70s, Germans loved Chevy Monte Carlos, and they would get them up on the Autobahn and drive 120 miles an hour. You used to be able to do that. There's no speed limit on the Autobahn. You cannot get a ticket for speeding because there's no speed limit. You get a ticket for tailgating. They enforce that with cameras, and your ticket is based on your income. So if you make $10,000 a year, the ticket's $100. If you make $1 million a year, the ticket might be $10,000. You know, and anyway, that's because they've come to the realization that it's not speed that kills, it's the differences in speed. And tailgating wipes you out. So the next time you're behind me on Broadway and you're that far from my back bumper and I hit the brake lights and start reaching, well, no, never mind, I would never do that. That would be road rage. Back up, because I don't want you to kill me. Now, if I'm tailgating you, it's a whole, get out of the way, man. You're going too slow. Have you ever noticed in Edmond, the same people that ride your rear end that far, going 75 miles an hour down Broadway, will leave 17 car lengths between cars at the traffic light. Does anybody get that? You know, I don't get that. You know, I mean, I try to leave a reasonable distance in front of me when I'm doing 75 on Broadway, but when you're stopped dead, at a dead stop, waiting for the light at 33rd and Broadway to change, which, by the way, there's been days that light has never changed. You know, I've had to walk home, take a shower, and change clothes, and then walk back and get my car. That light never changes. Anyway, I'm not bitter. They will, you know, it's like, I'll do everything but put my car in the trunk of your car because we're stopped, right? It doesn't make any difference. I don't get that about it. There's a lot of things I don't get, I guess. All right, so this same guy, this Harvard professor named Michael Porter, looked at case studies of firms that are in more than 100 industries, okay? And they broke down all the facts and figures about these 100 industries. And there were lots of different strategies that these companies used to become successful global companies. You know, Mercedes uses quality, Kia uses price, okay? With some quality mixed in, because I think they're really pretty good cars anymore, all right? But the strategy is different. The strategies to become a successful global company differ, but there was a common theme that emerged in these 100 different industries. A firm that succeeds in a global market has first succeeded in intense domestic competition, okay? So competitive advantage in the global market has to come out of continuous improvement, innovation, and change. Okay, continuous improvement, innovation, and change. All right? Anybody ever read a book called Black Swans? No, that's because you read your textbook, right? Yeah. You do? Did anybody buy it? No, I'm kidding. Okay. This guy whose name escapes me right now references back to the fact that I'm 58. I don't remember as well as I used to. His last name's Talib. He lives in New York. His family's from Lebanon. Anyway, he wrote another book called Fooled by Randomness. And Professor Porter has these three components: continuous improvement, innovation, and change. And Morelli's corollary to this is luck. So you can take that for whatever it's worth. This is why there's billionaires out there that everybody hates, because they're just no good, and they're stupid. They're just real lucky. So anyway, I probably shouldn't tell you this. You go out and be an entrepreneur and drop out of here, and then they'll fire me from my cushy little job. All right, so enough of that guy's study. Let's talk about 4 trends influencing global marketing. Number 1, the decline of economic protectionism. All right, what's protectionism? Protectionism is where you don't let anybody sell anything in the United States except United States companies. In other words, if you don't make it here, you're not going to sell it here. Look at Great Britain. If you study the history of Great Britain, when it established its empire in the 19th century, well, its second empire, it lost the first one. That was us. But the second empire, it put together were all these colonies in Asia and Africa, and still in Canada to a certain point in time. All right, why did that work? Because inside the British Empire, there weren't any tariffs, there weren't any trade restrictions. So if you wanted to go to what's now Burma and drill for oil, you could ship that stuff into Britain and there wasn't any tariff on it. Whereas there was a tariff on anything coming in from any other country. It wasn't part of the British Empire. Prohibitive tariffs. You know, the United States, we used to get our federal budget. We used to get all of our income from tariffs. First time we had an income tax that I know of anyways, the Civil War. And second time, they had to pass a constitutional amendment to get it done because the Supreme Court had ruled the income tax was unconstitutional. But this is an American national government class. All right, so let's say every Honda car that comes into the United States pays a certain tariff, all right, pays a certain amount of tax to the government. And currently the tariffs that are paid on goods coming into the United States are at historically low levels, both for our history and for the history of the world, because we're trying to encourage free trade. We're not trying to protect our domestic manufacturers. Let's say that, you know, we bail out General Motors, we increase tariffs on foreign cars. There might not be as many Hondas on the road, or Toyotas. Although there'd probably be a loophole for the Hondas and Toyotas that are made in Ohio and Tennessee and places like that. All right, so that's one way that you can create trade barriers is by tariffs. Another way is quotas. We will only let in 100,000 Hondas. And after that, we're not going to let any more in. And that tends to, you know, obviously since they sell a lot of Hondas, that would tend to decrease the number of Hondas that are sold and increase the number of Chrysler 300s or whatever somebody would buy instead of that. When I bought my Nissan pickup in 1984, there was a 25% tariff on it. So if the truck cost $5,000, $12,500 of that went to the government as a tax for bringing the truck in. Okay, so the tariffs and the quotas have generally gone by the wayside, at least to a certain extent, to a great extent, I'd say. That started about 50 years ago with a thing called the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. And that was an international treaty that was signed by numerous countries that lowered trade barriers. Okay? The problem is it didn't address quotas and it did not address services. So back in 1995, we came back with the World Trade Organization, the WTO, and that has 153 members. I don't remember how many countries there are in the world, but that's most of them. You know, probably Liechtenstein doesn't belong to the World Trade Organization. But then again, I don't know what they export. Andorra. But trade between these 153 members is 90% of world trade. So that's most of it. And they set rules about tariffs, but they also settle disputes. Several years ago, American beef industry, you know, ranchers and beef processors, took the European Union to court at the World Trade Organization over bans on beef that had been, the cows that had been given certain antibiotics or steroids or growth hormones. Okay, they also, the EU has banned genetically modified crops for whatever reason, and frankly, I think the EU won because the jury's still kind of out. You know, if you have corn, right? If you go eat corn, that corn has been hybridized and modified so many times. It's not really recognizable as corn, kind of quasi-corn, which is why you should all refrain from eating corn. Unless you like it. Okay, that's number one, is decline of economic protectionism or the rise of free trade, all right? Number two, rise of economic integration. Groups of countries have come together to be trading partners and eliminate barriers to trade. European Union. Forget the government stuff, right? Forget the fact that, like, I think 16 of the countries in Europe use the euro as their currency, which ask the economy, when you're in economics, ask the economics professor what they think about the euro. A lot of economists think it's a dumb idea because each country needs to be able to play with its own currency. But, okay, you go to, there's 27 countries in the European Union as far as trading merchandise and services go. So if you have a vehicle that's manufactured in France, you can sell it in Germany without any trade barriers, or vice versa. You know, you make a BMW after all, BMW is Bavarian Motor Works, right? You make it in Bavaria, it's a little state in Germany where people yodel a lot because it's up in the mountains, snow-capped mountains. Heidi's there helping build the BMWs. So when you build your BMW in Germany, you're going to be able to sell that anywhere within the European Union, and you're going to be able to do that without quotas and tariff barriers. NAFTA is another one. We talked about NAFTA. That's Mexico, U.S., China. You know, you make something in Mexico, you put it on a truck. The truck driver goes to sleep down by Norman. Truck rolls over, blocks I-35 for 6 hours. They put all the crap they made in Mexico on a truck, another truck. They take it to Canada. There's no trade barriers in that. What's that? Truck drivers just have a lot of issues. You know, I wouldn't want their job.
You get the job because you can't get anything else.
Oh, wow. Well, okay, that's okay because we don't have a truck driving school. Did everybody hear that?
No.
Yeah, truck drivers drive trucks because they can't get a real job.
It is a really cushy job, other than crap hours and stuff.
Yeah.
They make a lot of money.
Well, they become grossly obese from sitting there driving all day
Right.
and eating
There's a lot
corn.
of craft to it, but there's a lot of compensation.
Yep.
And there's a lot of people going into truck driving at the time.
Well, you know, I think you can always get a job. You know, that's one thing. It's kind of like nursing. You can always get a job. I'd rather be a nurse. You don't have to work outside and drive. Okay. When NAFTA was created, it basically created a marketplace of 450 million people. So now the U.S. company can sell useless stuff to 450 million people instead of just the 300 million people inside the United States. There's a lot of these little trade organizations that have risen up in the last 30 to 50 years. Okay, number 3, global competition among global companies for global consumers.
Can you say it again?
Okay, global competition among global companies for global consumers. All right, I have a Honda vehicle. My car was made in Japan, all right? But the Honda before that was manufactured in Ohio. I used to drive a Mazda, and I used to have a lot of friends who were in the United Auto Workers out of the GM plant. Okay, and they would criticize me roundly for driving a foreign car. All right, and I said, well, what do you drive? Well, we have a Mercury Marquis. There were more American parts in my Mazda than there were in the Mercury Marquis, which was built in either Canada or Mexico. So it's hard anymore to tell what is a United States company that is all geared up for only a United States market, and what is a global company that's trying to sell products in a variety of world markets. All right. Here's some characteristics that they talk about in the book. The firms originate, produce, market products globally. They're global companies. There's three kinds of global companies. First is an international company. That engages in activities in different countries as an extension of the marketing strategy in the home country. 20 years ago, United States car companies built really bad little cars. Okay? They were horrible. They couldn't sell them anywhere else on earth. Right? Well, if they had built a good car that would sell in the United States, they could have tried to sell it in other countries. All right? But the international company basically is marketing, their marketing strategy is for their domestic country. Then there's the multinational firm, and their theory is the world consists of unique parts and they market to each part differently. So the international firm is General Motors, and they make big cars for the United States and Canada, but they own GM of Europe. So they make little cars in Europe that they import to the United States to sell through their GM dealer network. They tried that. It was called Opel. That was a miserable flop. Then they tried it for a while with Isuzu, and that didn't work so well. They also tried this hybrid, not a hybrid car, but a hybrid concept. The world's worst GM factory was in Fremont, California, and in 1985, General Motors provided the factory and the employees. Toyota provided, yes sir?
You were saying China isn't in that.
I'm sorry.
China isn't in that. It's us, Canada, and Mexico.
Yeah, yeah.
You kept saying China. I thought it just slipped out by accident.
Oh, okay, yeah. Us, Canada, and Mexico, sorry. Yeah. I'm old, I'm liable to say anything. You know?
Okay.
I just get going up here. But anyway, so they called it the New United Motors Corporation. And that's a name they dug up from back in the 20s when United Motors merged with General Motors. But anyway, the world's full of trivia, and most of it's in my head. And they produced a car called the Chevy Nova. And it went from being the worst factory GM ran as far as quality defects and that kind of thing to being the best one because of this hybrid model. And that's way beyond the scope of this class. I don't know why I brought it up, other than the fact I used to own one. It was a good little car. All right, then you have the transnational firm. The whole world is our market, and we're going to emphasize our similarities, and our products are going to meet universal consumer needs and wants. So they have a global brand with a global marketing strategy. And there's a lot of American companies that have adopted this. A lot of other companies have too. And this gets real confusing. Sometimes you don't know who's still an American company and who really is a European company, or they ought to be in Mexico or whatever. And it can get a little bit confusing. Okay, book talks about global consumers, which is what these transnational firms shoot for. Okay, a really good example of a global consumer would be the person who wants a BMW. Okay, yuppies everywhere love BMWs. That may be a term that's out of favor. Young, upwardly mobile people. Everybody wants a BMW. You know, if you have just graduated from law school, medical school, engineering school, whatever, you want a BMW because it appeals to your sensibilities. You know, they drive nice, they're classy looking, la la la. Okay, well, if you're in Mexico and you just graduated from medical school, you want a BMW. If you're in France and you just graduated from engineering school, you want a BMW. It's like the universal, for that little global consumer, the shallow and pretentious yuppie, that appeals to that group no matter where they are in the world. Okay, you ever seen the news when they have the revolution in some country, or the rebels are coming down from the hills to shoot up the capital city? The rebels are always in an old beat-up Toyota truck, and they're all hanging from the Toyota truck with machine guns. And the president of the country, who flees to the airport to leave the country on his private jet, always goes to the airport in a BMW. Yeah, sometimes a Mercedes, but almost always a BMW. Okay, fourth little thing that's changing, or influence of global marketing, is the emergence of a networked global marketplace. You're using internet technology as a tool for exchanging goods, services, and information on a global scale. Does anybody ever buy stuff on eBay? Yeah, I buy stuff on eBay occasionally. Where's the seller?
Everywhere.
They're everywhere. You know, they're in Canada, they're in China,
My
they're in
grandpa makes old-fashioned tube speakers and sells them to people in China because they really like them there.
yeah, for whatever he's found his little niche of a market, and he's playing it for all it's worth, which means your grandfather's an intelligent being. Yeah, maybe he could be a guest speaker and tell us all how to do that. Yeah, but I bought things from England on eBay. I bought things from Germany on eBay. Really, the only thing that I do kind of look at is not so much where the things are coming in from, it's how much the shipping is. You know, and that kind of comes. Sometimes that's a prohibitive amount of the shipping. Yes, sir.
Oh, sorry, I was.
Okay.
Just.
All right, no problem. Twitches are allowed. Yeah, okay. All right, so unless anyone has any serious objections, let's call it a day. Next Tuesday, the real teacher will be here. You all need to tell him I did a magnificent job. And whatever. So, thank you. We'll see you later.